First, we have the stern voice of the law. It addresses the prisoner against whom the charge is being made, in this case the Jew who is in the law, or, as Paul sometimes puts it, under the law. Paul has already demonstrated that all Gentiles are guilty before God. Now Israel joins the rest of the world in the dock. In Paul's world, if you were on trial and had nothing more to say in your defense, you put a hand over your mouth as a sign. Sometimes court officials would strike the prisoner on the mouth to indicate that their mouths should be stopped. In other words, that they were obviously guilty and should not be attempting to defend themselves. This happened to Jesus in John chapter 18, verse 22, and to Paul in Acts chapter 23, verse 2. So when Paul says that every mouth may be stopped, he is imagining not only that the Jews have joined the Gentiles in the dock, but that all of them together are left without any defense. The whole world is accountable to God. All people are obviously guilty and must now face God as their judge. This, then, is the main point of the present passage, to finish off the job of rounding up the whole human race before its creator and finding it guilty. Verse 9 picks up from the rapid-fire discussion in the previous section, which Paul may realize has left some of his listeners gasping for breath, and in effect repeats the question of verse 1. Are Jews in fact better off than Gentiles? No, he replies, because I have already placed a charge against both groups. More law court language here. Not only are Jews as well as Gentiles guilty of sin, worse, they are under its power. This introduces another theme of this letter. Sin is not only an act of wrongdoing, it is a power with, we might dare to say, a life of its own. Interestingly, though Paul can refer to the Satan, e.g. chapter 16, verse 20, he often uses sin as a way of talking about evil as an almost personal force at work in the world. This comes out particularly in chapter 7. For the moment, though, he concentrates on producing a charge against his fellow Jews. He does not now, as he did in chapter 2, verses 21 to 24, suggest particular sins of which individuals might be guilty. He contents himself with quoting at length from several biblical passages, mostly in the Psalms. These quotations repeat, from various angles, the charge that God's people, just like the pagan nations, have failed to honor him as God or show him proper reverence, and that their lives have consequently failed to reflect his goodness, wisdom, and love. Paul seldom quotes from the Old Testament, though, without having at least half an eye on the wider passage from which the quotations come. A glance at the key passages, Psalms 14, 5, 140, 10, and 36, with Isaiah chapter 59 for good measure, is revealing. In more or less each passage, the charge against the wicked is framed within, or followed by, the promise that God will act to rescue those who are helpless before evil and to make good his covenant despite everything. This is the point to which Paul is building up in chapter 3, verse 21, and what follows. Even when issuing a withering biblical indictment of his fellow Jews, he does so in such a way as to hint, for those who know their Bibles, that the solution is close at hand. To round the matter off, he returns in verse 20 to the question of the law. Still talking about Jews, those in the law, he explains that works of the law can never be the basis upon which anyone is declared to be in the right. In technical language, is justified. He has just quoted at length from the Old Testament, and his point here is directly related to that. If the Jew appeals to the covenant status which is marked out by possession of the law itself replies, "You have broken me. Through the law comes the knowledge of sin," says Paul. This looks ahead to chapter 5, verse 20, and the whole of chapter 7, where the puzzles about the law and why God gave it are sifted through in more detail. But his main point should not be missed. Anyone who imagines that they can stand before God and appeal to works of the law as a reason for final justification, that is, for a favorable verdict at the last judgment, is barking up the wrong tree. Appealing to the law is like appealing to the policeman who caught you in the act, or to the legal expert who framed the statute you have quite obviously broken. The thing so many Jews, including Paul himself, had counted on to separate them out from the wicked world, resting in the law, as in chapter 2, verse 17, was not only no protection against God's judgment, it would actually count on the other side.